As I said earlier, today is a conversation, a critical time, critical moment for me, for many others. It's the Movement for Black Lives Week of Action. This is a conversation about Black land and liberation. And it's also in context of leading with love. And one of the challenges that I know I had in the conversation around leading with love was, where's the place of love in a time of rage? Because many of us are inspired to rage because of our deep and radical love for our people and for our folks. And as we were talking about this, we wanted to explore how can we learn to lead with love from the resilience and resistance of Black liberation movements. And we have some of the foremost leaders and organizers who are leading today in the movement for Black land and for liberation. And so I wanted to take some time to hear from them directly and have an opportunity to have them share a bit about themselves. But I wanted to do it a little creative way, all right? So check this out. If this were a Black land and liberation mixtape, what track would you dedicate to the movement in the moment that we're in? Again, if this were a Black land and liberation mixtape, what track would you dedicate to the movement in this moment that we are in? Audience, feel free to participate. Hashtag mixtape. And we're gonna open it up to our panelists to share your name, your organization, and the response to your contribution and dedication to the movement. So I will start off with Makani, if you would like to jump it off.
Absolutely. Well, greetings and peace, everyone. I hope that all you folks are sending off those emails to the president and make sure that our people get that part, that clemency, what they need. With higher ground change. And my contribution to the mixtape would be an old school, of course, some old school song called Eyes and by Doug and Jean Carn on the Spirit of a New Land album. Google it. It's off the chain. You'll like it.
Great. I say. Well, kick it over to Nwamaka.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nwamaka Agbo, and the hat I'm wearing today, I'm a fellow at Movement Strategy Center working on new economy projects. And my dedication to the mixtape playlist would definitely be Solange's For Us, By Us. And I think it's a great song with a dope beat. And I'd probably add Jean Grey to spit, a verse on it. And that's because I think there's particularly a time where Black women have continued to hold down our communities over decades, over centuries, and really having Solange's music playing in the background as we continue our fight is super important. And I think that this is a track that also speaks to the importance of having clear designated spaces that are being led by Black people for Black people in an unapologetic way, where we get to exercise our own self-determination and our own self-agency over the ways we want our communities to look and feel like. I could go on and on for all the reasons I think that song is great, but I definitely think one of the things that I'm super clear about is that our communities need to be at the forefront of shaping what we want our future to look like, and we need to be using all the tools at our disposal to make that happen.
I love it. Ashe. All right, Quinton, how about you?
I'm supposed to introduce myself too, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
All right, yeah, so my name's Quinton Sankofa. I'm a part of a few different formations. One of the most, the ones I spend a lot of my time at is at the Movement Generation Collective, Justice and Ecology Project. And we have an initiative called, that we are in partnership with the Blackout Collective around, called the Black Land and Liberation Initiative. And then I'm also part of the Brotherhood of Elders Network in Oakland, an intergenerational group of Black men trying to do the best that we can to be better people for our people. If I was going to pick a song, it's kind of tough, but for today, I would say The Ecology, also known as Mercy, Mercy Me by Marvin Gaye. I love that song because I always like to highlight that as people of African ancestry, we're not new to this, we're true to this. We've been stewarding land in a meaningful way for, like our ancestors would tell us, since time immemorial. And so I always want to highlight that when we're talking about land liberation and ecology. We've been doing this, we'll continue to do it.
Thank you all. And I guess I should contribute one too. And the one that came to mind is one that often comes to mind when I think about the intergenerational connection, and that's Stevie Wonder as. And there's a particular, like right before he gets into the break, change your words into truth and change that truth into love. Maybe our children's grandchildren and great great grandchildren, right, will tell I'll be loving you. And it is my hope that as an ancestor in the making, that I live my life in a way where when my name is remembered, they will also say Ashe, the way we do for our ancestors. So that's my prayer, and that's my song, and I can get down to that, to the beat and the music. One of my top favorite albums of all time. But before I digress into that, let's go ahead and jump into the conversation and rooting ourselves in a love for our land and love for our people, and the moment we're in this love and resistance. So the first question I have is around, what are the practices of resiliency and resistance that you're currently engaged in? I would love for Makani maybe to kick us off to talk about, in context of, we know that there's a legacy and tradition of Black land and liberation movements, and would love to hear more about what you're engaged in now, and maybe other lessons that we can pull from that you've been engaged in.
Well, thank you. You know, I love the age before beauty thing. It's all good.
Both. You got both things.
That's all good. I'm not mad. It's all good. I appreciate it. You know, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and it's earlier today we were talking, and Brother Calvin talked about Baba Shokwe Lumumba, former mayor of Jackson, and eternal ancestor and leader and thinker around these issues. And I recently wrote a piece that looked at about 200 years of Black cities as a site of struggle, and the ways in which many of us in our communities have either taken over cities, formed cities, either as escape from enslavement, or post the chattel slavery era, where we created our own spaces. So we've had this long and rich history of land as liberation, not just land and liberation, but land as liberation. And so that's really important, because so much and I love the quote that you brought into the space from Malcolm, right? That in many ways for us it's the same thing, because how are you liberated if you have no land? So there were cities, even a city called Soul City, and I saw somebody posted about the Soilful City, and I'm in DC right now, that we have this history of liberating land either through purchase or just by occupying it, taking back the land, and that part of what that work has been about how we figure out how to thrive, that it's not just about land or not just about growing food. All those things are important, but it's about where is a space for Black people to be free, and land is really the foundation of that. So I think that's really important. And I guess so there's been a sort of resurgence of Black people going back to land, farming, finding that space. Two things I'll think about, and then I'll want to definitely pass the mic. One was a children's book that, it's not in print, but it's still available, called Birthday. And the book is by John Steptoe, who was famous children's author. But this book, for some reason, because it was about Black people, the first Black nation in the U.S., and it's the 8th birthday of the first child born in this liberated Black zone. And it's a beautiful book. And if you can get a hold of it, it's worth having. And what I loved about that book, it came out, I think, about 1970. So I was a kid, not a little kid, but a kid when it came out. And it was so inspiring to read about the possibility of this space where Black people were free and tending the land together. And so that became a big inspiration for me in my work on, land use and planning, and how do we play with the rules, and what is the spaces for us to hold this, and learning about land trust and working for trust to understand that work. And then the other piece, and this is about the resilience practice, is about Black joy. And because the two are related, right? And I recently did a workshop, because a big part of my work right now is talking about Black joy and talking about Black liberation as a centering space to think about public policy. Like, what if the organizing principle of public policy was Black joy? And so I'll be having these conversations with, like, recently 200 Black women. And so we start with a meditation. And what's been very interesting is how many people cry, and not just women, but how many Black people cry because they say to me, it's the first time they've ever had any time to think about Black joy. So I feel like it's my personal mission to change that.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you, Makani. You know, I think that's actually a beautiful leeway for you, Brother Quinton, if you would like to talk about some of the work that you've been engaged in around Black land and liberation, particularly picking up on the pieces of this conversation around what does liberation mean when it's rooted in Black joy. So I'd like to hear more from you about some of the practices and resilience and resistance that you're in.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, well, that was beautiful, first of all. I appreciate that reframing of Black land as liberation. That's definitely something I'm gonna carry forward. I mean, for me, it starts, you know, on an individual level, just me as a person of African ancestry, understanding who I am, where I come from, and honoring and recognizing the struggle that's come before me. So I never, I try not to ever look at myself as, you know, disconnected from a larger picture, right? So I'm just one small component of a big struggle and a big story. And I think understanding that story is one of the practices that I try to do consistently. Which means really actually thinking about my ancestors directly and asking the questions of my, like my grandparents, what was life like for them? How did we come to be? Where did we come from? What are they seeing about now? What do they see as like things that they are proud of, that they paved the way for, things that they think are areas where we still need to struggle it out, and also then being clear that they've given us something and we take the best of what they put down, and then we put our own spin on it, and try to even improve on it. So for me, it starts right there as an individual person and my own understanding of, you know, ecology. And I think for me, that's really helped me understand, you know, liberation, period, taking our cues from the natural world. There's a lot that we can learn by just observing the natural patterns, by engaging with them. This love of diversity is something that is embedded in life. Life is diversity. And I do look at the oppressive systems as an attack on diversity in an attempt to homogenize, you know, life and commodify life. So for me, it's an analysis, it's a practice, getting out and looking and learning. But then beyond myself as an individual, I have the honor and the privilege to be in a couple of different formations, and have been for a long time. I started this journey really when I was an undergrad at Michigan State University, studying urban and regional planning. And then Katrina was the eye-opener for me. I sat in a geography class and the professor, you know, in the first couple of days of the class said, hey, there's a storm brewing in the Caribbean. If it makes landfall, it could be catastrophic because the waters in the Gulf are very warm due to, you know, global warming. And as a kind of social justice activist, that was the first time that I really started thinking like, oh, I should pay attention to climate change. And so pretty much from that point on, I've been trying to put these two conversations together in my head around social justice and eco-justice. And I had the just fortunate opportunity to meet some folks from Movement Generation in Detroit in 2010. And that's where I went to the first Justice and Ecology retreat for me at Movement Generation, where I was able to have these kind of conversations around the intersections, right, of, you know, climate, environment, race, gender, all of these things. And that's allowed me to then branch out to be a part of a couple of different efforts. The one that we're currently engaged in is called the Black Land and Liberation Initiative. This is an interesting project. It's an experiment. It's a project that we didn't like create and then fundraise for, right? We found an opportunity and we took advantage of this opportunity, and together with the Blackout Collective, we co-designed the Black Land and Liberation Initiative. And basically what we're looking to do with that is over the course of 18 months, we want to experiment with bringing direct action, nonviolent direct action, training skills to Black activists, and along with kind of an analysis around eco-justice. And it's our hope that people will engage in direct actions that highlight the need for Black folks to be reconnected and remember our way forward in terms of our relationship with land. So structurally what that looks like is we want to flip the model of kind of like the weekend training, because we all know, right? You go to the weekend training, it's cool, you get inspired, but you need more. So we're interested in kind of like a longer term, a more deeper, kind of like multi-pronged approach where people are gathering multiple times over the course of 18 months with the same group of people. So we have a 1-week training that we do at the site of a former plantation in North Carolina. It's called the Franklinton Center. Everybody on this call, I encourage you all, if you have the capacity to plan retreats and you have budgets and resources, investigate the Franklinton Center because it's a beautiful space to be at and they can use your support. It's a historic place for our ancestors, especially during the Civil Rights Movement. A lot of folks use that as a meeting space and a retreat space for social justice work. But anyway, we start off with a week-long training there where we're coming into a couple of things. We want to help folks understand the moment in time that we're in right now around ecology and what's happening with climate change and our world and our ecosystems being collapsing, right, because of the economy and the function of it. Then we want to also engage in shared work on the land. So we bring folks together to do things together. Our first gathering in August of last year, we went to the only dairy farmer in the state of North Carolina, the only Black dairy farmer, who is a Yoruba priestess also, which is just beautiful. And we did some work on their farm to help fix up some things that they needed. And then we also do training on nonviolent direct action, like I said earlier. And then there's a whole structure around how folks take this from that national gathering back to their local cities. And then we have a regional gathering that brings folks together in various parts of the country. And then the arc was towards preparing to do direct actions on Martin Luther King Day as an experiment to see, one, can you inspire and motivate folks to take a risk, to do something that's quasi-illegal, to do something that is bold and beautiful, but also centers land in that piece. And so we kind of just completed that first phase, and now we run it back again, another national gathering, some regional trainings, and then some actions on Juneteenth that we hope to be bigger and more bold.
Great, thank you for that, Quinton. And maybe we could circle back and hear more about some of the local actions that a few of us are actually at in Oakland just on Monday. In the meantime, I want to shift gears and speak with Nwamaka about some of the practices that you're engaged in now around ownership, resiliency, resilience-based model, and also restorative-based model for Black land and liberation. So I want to open it up to you, Nwamaka, to speak more about how you're engaging in this practice.
Sure. It's always so inspiring to hear what everybody's up to. I'll start off by saying, I'm really clear that my work is focused on centering Black communities, vulnerable communities, and low-income communities at the center of our new economy. When I started my fellowship at MSC, there was this growing movement people were referring to as the new economy. And I observed that it wasn't being Black-led, and there weren't even Black leaders in this space. And it became really clear really quickly that if we don't actually have Black people engaging in this space where foundations are starting to drive a lot of money towards, we're going to end up having another movement that only continues to widen the gap between the haves and have-nots. And so there's a place where I'm already observing that those folks that have the leisure time, the flexible capital, and are risk tolerant and able to engage in new cooperative movements and new businesses are the ones that are leading this space. Whereas those end up being the people who are oftentimes whiter and wealthier. And so even in this place where now we have this thing called the sharing economy, right? And Uber and Airbnb and big corporations have done a great job of corporatizing that and using the sharing economy as a way to actually capture and consolidate more wealth within individuals. But, you know, when I grew up, what people refer to as the sharing economy, that was just community. You just helped folks out based on what you had and you shared, and it wasn't a thing to be corporatized and profited off of. And so for me, you know, I'm really clear that the new economy, when Black people are engaged in this work around the new economy, we need to be centering ourselves and the needs of our communities, because we also have brothers and sisters that are on the front lines of fighting police brutality, addressing access to healthy water in Flint, Michigan. So when they are done with those fights, we actually already need to have a strong and resilient community and home for them to come back to that actually reflects what true equity looks like. And then the other piece is, I think just the moment that we're in, right, is that we are really, truly struggling as a country and as a people to figure out what it looks like to have justice and equity embedded in the ways we design society. And in order for us to actually get there, we first have to acknowledge and repair the harm, the economic harm and trauma that's been done to low-income communities, particularly Black communities, with policies like redlining and practices like mass incarceration. We need to repair our communities and make them whole so that we can all get to a place of just transition, which is kind of this piece of work that I look at. And so, like, I just think it's really important to name that, whether it's direct action, whether it's buying land, whether it's all the different ways that we try to capture resources, we're actually just repairing the harm that's been done to us so that we can get to like an at-par level with the rest of everybody else. Like, there's a reason why we didn't end up getting our 40 acres and a mule like we were promised, right? Because they understood that if you actually have access to land, you can grow your own food, you can create shelter, you can have safe space to organize and educate your babies. And so that's why they're always trying to take land away from us. And I think this next political moment, we're going to see another consolidation of wealth that actually takes resources out of Black and brown communities. And we need to be vigilant about saying, no, not today. That's actually not going to happen. And so, you know, that's just kind of the framework that really informs how I do my work. And so one of the projects I'm super excited about is an initiative called Restore Oakland. And this is a joint initiative between the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, a 20-year-old organization that's been working to end mass incarceration nationally, and Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, a 15-year-old organization that works to fight for workers' rights, particularly within the restaurant industry. And so in a place like Oakland, where gentrification displacement, I would say, is like the #1 issue that our communities are experiencing right now, when you have a city that's dealing with those type of pressures, but you also have a city where the restaurant industry is the #1 growing industry in Oakland. And then Oakland was named the 5th foodie city in the New York Times. So there's economic opportunities that are there to be got if we actually know how to take advantage of them. And at the same time, the restaurant industry is the #1 employer of formerly incarcerated individuals, but it's also the most segregated industry. So it's a place where we continue to see Black and brown folks in the back of the house jobs and whiter, wealthier folks, you know, at the front of the house jobs. And so Restore Oakland, it brings together an initiative in which we can actually design around the needs of most impacted people, particularly formerly incarcerated folks. So having a nonprofit restaurant model, we're not only in running a restaurant and being able to redefine what fine dining looks like, so we can kind of move away from the white tablecloths and we can put on our Black Power mixtape, our Black Joy mixtape, and that redefines what it looks like to convene in like Black joyful spaces. But then also being able to have access to restorative justice practices. So as people are re-entering back into the communities, as people are getting on the job training in the restaurant industry, they can also have access to meaningful skills and tools to address conflict in their communities. So they actually don't have to call the police. They actually don't have to fear their neighbor. They actually have the skills to redefine what safety and community looks like. And so to have 2 grassroots-based building organizations coming together to create an entity to own a property that can actually be a sanctuary, a safe haven for our people to gather, while also having a different model for what equitable economic development looks like. This is a space that, in addition to having the restaurant space and providing restorative justice programs and partnering with groups like Community Works West, Urban Peace Movement, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, we'll also be able to provide affordable nonprofit office space. So, not only are our people getting pushed out of Oakland, but nonprofits are getting pushed out of Oakland. And so for organizations to come together and say, we're actually going to be a new model for equitable development, we're actually not going to subscribe to market-based strategies for how we do development. We're going to raise the funds on our own. We're going to develop the space on our own, and we're going to design it based on the needs for our folks, I think is, to me, extremely inspiring. And for me, one of the biggest lessons in doing this work, it's been clear that it's really important for our communities to develop the in-house skills and tools to do this type of work. We actually need to have a better understanding of how finance and capital works so that we can negotiate capital on our own terms and get to the type of funding that is regenerative and it doesn't extract wealth out of our communities. We actually need to have lawyers that are willing to work with us that can understand the boundaries of what's possible, and how do we push up against those boundaries so we can move away from a model that's focused on individual wealth and resources and riches to something that's based in true shared prosperity. Like, we actually get to redefine how we develop our communities, and having two organizations that are willing to take on an experiment on how to do that is extremely exciting to me. And I think that there's, we're already seeing in the chat box, there's a lot of great models out there, and we need to be in a place of, as a movement, where we are experimenting with all the different ways and strategies we do this work. So, I was with Quinton and you, on Monday, we were participated in that direct action to take over some land. And, now I have to go, figure out how, we get the rest of the financing for this project, but we need to have a space in our movement where we allow people to use all the different tools and skills that are available to us so that we can actually truly get free.
Thank you for that really powerful framework. And then even in the conversations, some of the themes I began hearing was like there are certain challenges in this power imbalance context that we live in that often require an entire ecosystem of transformation work. There's some that's around resilience and reclaiming, and there's others that are around, hey, how do I get traditional funding streams or different funding streams, right? And part of what we're also speaking to is hearing about this deepening sense of where do we belong and how do we create a way of belonging in a time of displacement, of gentrification, and deepening redlining of communities. So I want to open up that question and just explore, what are the other specific challenges that we are facing as we are doing our experimentation in Black joy and liberation? So what are those specific challenges, and what are the ways that you are addressing those challenges? I would love to actually start with Quinton and then move to Makani. And just taking note of the time, we're at 1:08. So if we can keep our comments maybe like 2 minutes so that we can then open it up to questions from our rest of our community here. So starting with you, Quinton, how do you address some of those specific challenges?
Okay. Okay, 2 minutes. All right. Interesting. I think there's so many things going on. The gentrification piece is really just wild in a lot of ways. One, for example, in the action that we did on Monday, right? Like, it's in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, right? But the neighborhood still has our folks there for the majority, but there's a whole bunch of new people there. And these are the people that call cops on people. You know what I mean? That's their first line of defense. When they see stuff, they don't interact with you, they don't engage with you, they don't talk to you. They move in there and think they own the place. It's that colonial mindset, right? So I think one of the ways that we're dealing with that is a couple ways. First of all, existing and refusing to not exist, right? Like, so, we're doing things that are meaningful and positive for our community first, right? Regardless of who's around. So I think just existing and being resilient and continuing to show up every day to these spaces. A lot of people have to do that, right? Like, they're doing that because this is a safe space for them to gather. Like, before it was a gentrified area, this slither of land is a gathering place. It's a park. That's what the city designated this space as, is a park, right? A pocket park. but then new folks come in, right? So like one of the interesting things is we troll people online sometimes. Like yesterday, it was an article about the action, right? And here comes all of these people who belong to the Neighborhood Crime Prevention Council, right? There's one of those in every neighborhood, right? It's the like police's way to get in bed with community and yada yada yada. So one of our comrades was on there trolling them, like they were like, "Oh man, what's going on? This is all crazy. I can't believe this is all happening. What's going on?" It's like she'll get on there and pretend like she's like one of the residents, like, "Oh my God, what's happening? Like, when is the next meeting? Can I come?" So we'll just show up and be like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, we're the people who are at the park. You want to talk? You got something to say? What's going on?" Right? So like, really directly confronting people sometimes too. So some of the door knocking really still helps when we're trying to talk to our neighbors, because there are folks in the neighborhood who get what we're trying to do and understand the complexities of their existence in these neighborhoods. And then there's just downright just racist people and classist people who you keep doing what you're doing and you have little battles with them. But there's so much we can go into, but sometimes it's just about having fun with people and like saying like, "No, we're not going anywhere. So you need to get used to us."
And what I loved about the action was that it was centered around a resilience-based strategy, reclaiming land that people are already using, and also the tone. The tone was intentionally Black joy, and the fact that there was barbecues and people playing instruments and people in an open mic, and there was gift exchanges and food and clothing, and there was just the folks who used to be there that were just there. There was something beautiful about that moment, and just saying we deserve to be in space and in community with each other, and we can celebrate Black joy openly, authentically, and unapologetically. I want to also hear from Makani, hear more about, what are some of those specific challenges and maybe some examples of how you address those challenges around, the barriers to Black joy and liberation.
That's a big question. I think I'm going to focus on land for a minute. Because there's so much to say, and I want to make sure I hear from folks. So just one small point that I think is important to remember, and that is all of this is in such a larger context. Mm-hmm. And so we're organizing and we're engaging with people, and we need to yank them up, hold them accountable, neighbor to neighbor. But this game is so much bigger than, so here we are, we're Black bodies in a neighborhood, and because we're there together, because the way Black is devalued, then the land is devalued. And that means people come in who don't have enough money to live in the hot, all white, like cool place. They come in as pioneers, and they trade off of our bodies, what our bodies do to the value, like almost in a kind of a different kind of commodification of Black people. And then they speculate and then force us out so the value can go up so they can make money, right? Basically off of our bodies one way or the other. So then, and this game it's about capitalism. It's about, the way value and racism and gender come together. So then how do we break the cycle? Because the truth of the matter is, Black joy, white joy, human joy, is that if we're in the system pitted against each other, where Black folks are the primary currency and have been from the beginning of this country, we are the currency. Whether it's about devaluing property or picking cotton or whatever it is, we are the currency. Indigenous land, and Black labor, and now immigrant labor, right? And so how do we build these bridges to help people understand that they are being pimped in a way that literally builds bridges, so that the kids who are born today come into have a different awareness of who they are in relationship to the world. Like, what is our global understanding of this? What's the global understanding of liberation? How do we connect these fights up? And how do we fight not only to be a race, and of course deal with white privilege, deal with racism, but also get to the point where folk understand that they're being gamed too. Not like, where you're just like, oh, here we're trying to love people without any struggle or anything like that. But we have to figure out how to do a better job of raising those things. And I think I feel really inspired by like the opportunity for like Movement for Black Lives is saying, okay, folks, You want to donate some of the land back to Black folks, right? Here's a place you can donate your white land to Black people, right? Because it's ill-gotten gains. How do you understand that history? How do we understand the history of this country? You know, when we're learning history from East Coast to West Coast, as if we're cheering, you know, for the white invaders. So there's a relationship of public education and what people learn. There's a relationship, our understanding of colonization and conquest and indigenous people, and not just the folks we think of as indigenous people, but like folks like Mexicans who are renamed, who are indigenous people, who they just name, you know, they said, well, you're Spanish. And like, no, you're not, you know, like, so there's work we have to do to build the kind of alliances that it will take to shift this. And what I loved about the action too, that it was also an opportunity, like you said, Brother Quinton, to have a dialogue.
Oh, did we?
No, I'm done.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Drop the mic.
You did. I was like, I don't even know what to do with it.
Sorry.
That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you. And as you were talking about this, you know, many questions were beginning to come in as well that were related to some of the themes that we're pulling out. So I do just want to say, if you have other questions, use the hashtag question. We will also say the question. And for those of you who are just on the phone, hopefully you've been sending some of your questions to Julie at movementstrategy.org. I wanted to give an opportunity for Nwamaka to also answer this question, because I know that sometimes the barriers are both internal and external, and some of the challenges in how you're experiencing the development of Restore Oakland. So would you like to speak to some of those challenges and ways you're addressing them?
Yeah, and I think, that's a great way to put it. I think some of the challenges I'm observing is that there's a way in which, as we do our Black organizing, we kind of limit ourselves in the ways that we go about doing the work. And I would offer that we actually get to have a diversity of tactics. We actually need to have a diversity of tactics, right? Like there's a way in which the right, they have their PACs, they have their C4s, their LLCs, their C3s, their foundations. They have a whole bunch of different ways that they organize and do their work. And we need to allow our movement to have as much breadth and depth in doing the same thing. And so there's a way in which, I think we saw this beautifully, there's a way in which Malcolm and Martin, you know, they didn't share tactics. They did not necessarily share ideologies, but they understood that they were both moving towards liberation and freedom. And so I would offer that there's an opportunity for us doing this work to actually not turn inwards and infighting and limit what each other's doing, but really respect the fact that we all get to move down our own differentiated paths of how we get towards freedom. And if we get to a place where, you know, for example, if we get to a place where there's only like one more jail left, and then we have to argue about abolitionism or reform on that jail, then we can have that conversation. But until we're faced there, let's respect that each of us has our own hustle, the way we're doing our work, and let's actually speak with each other directly when possible, you know, rather than blasting each other, because there's a way in which we actually get to other, even with all our questions agree, but that we're all
from Zoom, and then I'll check with Julie to see if there's other questions that may have come in. The first question, have owned, right, and been victimized because of a lack of defense forces. And the example, you know, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, and there's other examples that we could think of, even here in Oakland, where there was once a Black community, and then BART all of a sudden split, and then a highway split. So there's this conversations around having ownership before, but how are we preparing or planning to protect ourselves as we engage in Black spaces so as not to repeat the past? So that's one question. And then another one is around acknowledging that we're also on land that was taken from others who were here indigenously, right? So I really like this question around what are ways that we are working with our indigenous nations whose land we all also are occupying or living on, So just thinking about the indigenizing of this movement and working in partnership.
I'll be quick. I see, Makani, I love your response to that second question. I'll tackle the first one, and I'll say that I think that there's a place where people are starting to be more and more clear how important it is for us to develop our own self-defense practices and what that looks like, and being able to identify safe spaces for us to convene and support one another. But the other thing that I think is really important is how essential it is to be building with our brothers and sisters in the global South, having an international movement, right? So that when things are happening in the United States, the rest of the world can reflect and mirror back, and can provide support when we need to, when we need it. I think I recently read an article about how doctors from Cuba have come to help people in Flint, Michigan, to support the young children that are dealing with lead poisoning. Even with Standing Rock, as Makani pointed out in her comment in the chat box, there was an international movement that was also pushing on banks and financial institutions to divest from the pipeline. And so we're having a movement happening here in the United States, but it's connected to a broader globalized movement around freedom and liberation for all people. And we need to figure out what are the ways that we can be in solidarity with one another and support each other. I'll stop there.
I was muted, but wanted to say thank you. Makani, did you want to build more on your response? I saw that you highlighted your response to the second question around working with indigenous nations. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to expand on that if you would like to.
Oh, that's enough. That's why I wrote it, so I didn't have to take up airspace. We can go on to more questions or however in the time we have left.
All right, and we do have a few other questions. And then for those of you who are just on the phone feature, we will be saving the chat function so that folks could see the conversations, and we'll share that out. So I see another question come in, but before I do, I want to kick it over to Julie to see if there's any questions that may have come in. All right, none your way, so we'll just continue here. And I see a question from Katie, and this is, I believe, directed towards you, Nwamaka, around being able to feel the confusion over how sometimes this plays out around diversity of tactics. And she lists, for example, my understanding is that ROC refused to support Indigenous women-led worker resistance to wage theft and an Oakland restaurant. I think we know which one we're talking about, because of wanting to protect relationships with restaurant owners. How do we reconcile conflicts of interest between these strategies, and how relationships with owning class people, including Black folks and people of color, like what's that, how do we reconcile and restore those relationships? So I'll start with you, Nwamaka, and if others have thoughts we can add into.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to take a stab at that one. I think first I would say part of the work that we have to do is get to know the full story of what happened. And so I actually don't think that is how it played out. From what I understood, ROC actually has continued to work with both parties and really trying to understand what happened with that situation. ROC made an active decision to actually not have that restaurant and be a part of the Raise network, and is continuing to work with Floor, who is the restaurant worker you're referring to, in terms of how to actually mediate what happened there. So first, I think we actually just need to ask questions so we can get a full picture of what's going on. And ROC also an organization, they're not a legal organization, and so this is a place where they can provide advice and support, and they can help to bring the parties together, but they can't make a ruling on it. So as I understand, the parties are still figuring that place out, that piece of the conflict out, and it's really unfortunate. And those are not the type of restaurants that we want to be lifting up in terms of restaurants that can provide good quality jobs for people. And so, yeah, I think we just actually have to stay in dialogue and in communication with each other. And I think we have to challenge each other to show up better. And if there's places where folks feel that organizations and institutions can show up better, then let's have those direct conversations with folks. But the only thing I can say is continuing to remain in relationship and community with one another as we struggle through the challenges of doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Quinton, did you want to also address some of the questions that come up?
Just real quick, I would say something about indigenous sovereignty and Black land. For me, like I spoke earlier, well, I don't know, maybe it was when we might have been checking in. The eldest ancestor I can call by name is a woman who is half white and half indigenous. So for me, it's highlights the complexity of this question, and I think our binary thinking around indigenous versus Black is wrong. Like, there's such a shared history here, like this idea that how do we own land when we're occupiers too, and we come from somewhere else. Like, I don't know what that's about. That's a Eurocentric framework because we didn't come here voluntarily, so I don't subscribe to that. What I do know in the indigenous people that I've been building with is they are interested in not owning land. Like that's never been the case. It's not like we own this land. You don't have no right to be here because someone brought you here against your will. That's not the conversation we've been having. The conversation we've been having is how do we heal this relationship through land together? And that's always been the struggle. Like, it's not about like, do Black people have a right to be here on this land? Like the indigenous people I talk to say we don't own the land, right? And we're struggling to get recognized for our tribe and have safe spaces for us. So anybody who wants to steward land in the right way with people and balance is welcome. Now, and then also, like, I just think we also have to be in mind about the diversity of indigenous folks here too. Like, every region has its own unique culture and its own history of resistance, struggle, and solidarity with indigenous folks and Black folks. So I think we need to have more nuanced conversations than what we're doing at this point around, ownership and who has a right to land and all of this stuff. I think we have to just be a little more nuanced in the conversation.
And I really appreciate the framing around the healing that comes when we get into these conversations around land and being in a community of struggle. Because some of this is reclaiming and some of this is acknowledging that there's some really tense intentions around the conversations that we just have to uplift and acknowledge and be committed to a process around liberation for all and what that actually looks like in practice. There's been a number of other questions that have been raised up. I know we're coming in on time, but I do at least want to surface the questions because we know that it's actually only been an hour and we went so broadly, but there's ways that we can continue these conversations to go deeply. So I did want to name that there was a conversation or a question earlier from my brother Orlando Green. I see the question, is there a way to integrate labor, especially the Black rank and file, into a Black land movement? And I wanted to couple that with Sean's question around, Sean, I live in Georgia. There's a lot of land readily available, and I'll footnote that, and there's a lot of land available in the South that's available for sale, and I don't know where to start in terms of buying this land. I've been a welder for 10 years, but I want to invest in land. I do want to offer a couple of resources that I can place in the chat feature, particularly around Brioxy, that's led by Cole, who also has led the Brown Boy Project, but Brioxy has engaged in ways to buy land in Baltimore, Detroit, and other places, both rural and urban, that can really be a good place to get some additional thoughts about engaging, Black working class, if they identify as such, or, Black folks who want to buy land, be it in the South rural areas or in urban settings. There's a fruitful conversation going on the chat feature. We're coming up on time. And I want to end with one last question that we can do as a takeaway. And then I'll go into how we can continue this conversation both online and in this community. But the last question I'll just like to ask for the panelists as a checkout: how can we deepen ourselves as a commitment to Black liberation? So how can we deepen ourselves as a commitment to Black liberation? It could be a practice, it could be one of the programs and support, or it could just be another way that we can just be in practice of this struggle together. So again, just to close out, how can we deepen ourselves as a commitment to Black liberation? Makani, I would like to start with you to close us off. Sure.
One is read. I know I saw a lot of questions that assume that the past was negative and horrible. I tried to respond to one. or that we couldn't defend ourselves. And I want to say, read more, deepen, know the story of resistance, and know it doesn't begin with us. How inspiring is that? And I want to recommend Dr. Akinyele Amoja's book. I put it in the chat, We Will Shoot Back. Not that I'm saying it's about shooting. I'm just saying,
powerful book,
that we have a history of resistance. And also just be still. Just make it a practice to at least start with 5 minutes. Just don't do anything, but just be quiet.
Ashe, thank you. Nwamaka.
Yeah, I would say, you know, to really underscore what Makani said, we actually get to reclaim and re-indigenize our own histories. And I think the movements and the actions that are happening this week under Reclaiming MLK, it's we actually get to redefine on our terms what Black liberation looks like. And this place of Black joy, for me, is we get to love up on each other every day, all day. And we need to do that. We need to be in spaces where we're sharing music, making music, cooking food, nourishing one another. And that is just as important in all the other different tactics and strategies that we use. So find a Black person to love up on today, of course, with consent. But yeah, we need to really take care of one another.
I love it. Thank you. How about you, Quinton?
You know, it's hard to say it because it's complex, and I think it depends on where you sit as an individual, right? Like, I have a different message for people who are of African descent than I do for others. But I think in general, I think we all could do much better for humanity by understanding our own ancestry first and foremost, and being clear about who we are and where we come from, everybody, and what is your own ancestors' connection to land. Because really, up until the last 150 years or so, the entirety of this planet has been land-based, right? So like, we all have cultures that come from land bases, and I think reconnecting to that and understanding the value of that is very important. And after you do that, I think is paramount that we all have a reorientation to the continent of Africa, because it's the only place in this world that we all can have a actual relationship to historically. And it's given the world so much, and so much has been taken away and still taken away to this day, that I think we all have a misunderstanding of our mother. And as long as we don't understand our mother, we will engage in things that are destructive as children.
Thank you, Brother Q. I appreciate everyone's time and contribution to this conversation. I want to offer ways that we could stay engaged because we definitely didn't get to all the questions, and I felt like we moved quickly in the last hour. But I want to offer that we could continue this conversation on MSC Facebook page and on social media. You can use the hashtags leadwithlove and Movement for Black Lives, M4BL. I also encourage folks to look at the Movement for Black Lives call to action. This week of action is happening, and there's definitely ways that you can participate within your own communities, as there's been a call to action that folks have responded to across the country, and also understanding that we're in a moment, a transition moment of sorts. Even though many of our folks remind us that we've been here before, it does call us in to love each other, to practice joy, and to practice what community and liberation looks like. So again, I thank everyone from our panel, Nwamaka, Quinton, Makani. Thank you for contributing your wisdom, your time, yourselves, and your commitments to this movement. For all of you who joined in through chatting, through your questions, and just your presence and listening. And I know that we will continue this conversation. This will be posted up as soon as it's edited, revised, and ready to go. But with that, I just want to leave you with free the land and free them all. Continue to contribute to this movement by being our best selves and committing to land and liberation for all our people. So I love you all, appreciate you all, continue to lead with love. Thank you again.